Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, August 18th, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 1-1 in the preseason for what that matters after a 17-14 loss to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers on Saturday night at Acrisure Stadium. I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to take you through a Steelers preseason reality check, I'm calling it. What's real, what's not of the narrative, storylines, and everything coming out of the Steelers preseason so far through the two games, through everything we've heard from training camp and I saw up at training camp, and just talk about what can we actually bank on taking into the regular season and what's just kind of preseason fool's gold, and where do we need to be with this team going into the year ahead of that week one matchup with the New York Jets. But before we do that, we'll run through some Steelers preseason news and start off with a less consequential one. The Steelers signed former Oregon cornerback Cam Alexander, who was released by the Seahawks last week. Likely just another body to get them through the end of the preseason. Maybe he'll play next week against the Panthers in the preseason finale. But that's a pretty crowded cornerback room that the Steelers have, and a lot of guys that I've talked about this preseason that I actually like in terms of practice squad bodies and everything. So I think Alexander is going to have a really tough time jumping on a moving train, as Mike Tomlin likes to say at this point in the preseason. Deshaun Jameson, somebody that I've been impressed with, and he made a couple plays on Saturday night as well. So, and he's not even someone who's going to make the 53-man roster, but just in terms of camp bodies or of practice squad bodies and whatnot, Cam Alexander, he's going to be a preseason body, but probably not a practice squad one. More significant, today, Mark Kaboly reported that Christian Kuntz, the Steelers' long snapper, very reliable long snapper, believed to have suffered a broken sternum and could be out several weeks to months. That tracks with what Missy Matthews reported on the sidelines when the injury happened on Saturday night, that Kuntz was kind of holding his chest and grabbing at that area. Thankfully, I mean, obviously not something that's good news. Thankfully, it's something with his actual sternum and not his heart, that could have potentially longer term effects. But for the Steelers' perspective, a broken sternum is going to keep him out for a while. So they'll have to go hunting for another long snapper. And all the reporters have been on top of it that hunt has already began. If that new long snapper or Kuntz returns and suffers another injury, I think the Steelers know who their emergency long snapper is, though. Logan Lee, 2024 draft pick, day 3 draft pick out of Iowa, who missed defensive line draft pick, not long snapper, who missed his entire rookie season due to an injury, filled in really nicely as the emergency long snapper on Saturday night. Really no issues with any of the snaps. Long snapper is one of those positions that you don't think about until it's a problem, and then you realize how nice it is to have a reliable one. Kuntz has been that for the Steelers. Lee was that on Saturday night, and while it's a small thing and it's unlikely whoever you bring in as your long snapper is going to suffer an injury, you thought it was unlikely that Christian Kuntz would suffer one in the preseason. So that could definitely help Logan Lee's case of making this roster. Earlier in training camp in the preseason, I had him as a loser. I think that was last week. I had him as a loser coming out of preseason game number 1. He just didn't play a lot, didn't make an impact when he did. Felt like he was pretty buried on the depth chart. He played a little more on the defensive line on Saturday night, and obviously filling in as a long snapper is legitimately valuable versatility to have and a potential way to get a hat on Sundays in the NFL. So that was a good feather in Logan Lee's cap that could really help him eke out one of the final defensive line roster spots for the Steelers. Also on the special teams, Chris Boswell ended his very quiet hold in on Saturday night, and he handled the opening kickoff for the Steelers. He's entering the final year of his contract, and he's set to make just over $3 million this season. He was an all-pro, first-team all-pro kicker last year. In my opinion, the best kicker in the NFL. Maybe Little in Jacksonville will have something to say about that after his 70-yarder, and there are some other guys maybe with bigger legs than Boswell, but I don't know if you're going to find one more reliable. He ended that hold in. It's unclear if the Steelers are going to get him a new contract, if that's why he ended the hold in. It really wasn't a big topic at all. It felt like this was always going to be the conclusion. Boswell just didn't have a ton of leverage in the situation. I want to see the Steelers keep him going forward. He's 34 years old, but that's not ancient as far as kickers go. So a good sign that he's back out there, but I wouldn't mind to see the Steelers get something done with him before the season. Obviously, their longstanding practice is that they're not going to negotiate during the year with any players, and I'm pretty sure they're not going to break that rule for a kicker. So just something to monitor until we get to week one. But Boswell is definitely going to be out there in week one. The final piece of big news is somebody who says he's willing to not be out there in week one. And I know Tommy and Shane, I believe, hit on this last Wednesday. Cam Heyward's hold-in has begun and is continuing and is a contentious topic in Pittsburgh and presumably in Steelers headquarters. Heyward is holding in, not participating in practices, and he has said he is willing to miss games. He has 2 years left on the deal he signed last offseason as a contract extension. In his first time speaking with the media since he began his holdout last week, he said, quote, "When I look around at my position, I think I'm like 22nd as a defensive tackle," end quote. Heyward obviously talking about his pay level. Continues the quote, "I'm 36 as a D lineman. I know what I bring to this team and what I'm capable of on and off the field. So it's hard for me to, after the year I've had, to really justify playing at the number I'm playing at. I understand I signed the contract last year, but I want to be completely honest with you. When I signed that, I told them," quote, he's quoting himself from a year ago in those negotiations, "when I have an all-pro year, I want to come back." Everyone kind of giggled, end quote. This is our first reality check. We're going to dive into this little bit that I've conjured up for this week's show. Cam Heyward is willing to miss games, reality or not, real or fake. I tend to believe that this is real. I'm leaning that way. I don't think I saw Mark Madden right in the Trib today that obviously Pittsburgh radio personality, right in the Trib today that in a column that he thinks the fact that Heyward doesn't want to, he likes to be liked and doesn't want to tarnish his legacy in Pittsburgh, is going to work against him ultimately and make him kind of fold in this situation. I think the pressure on the other side, the counterweight to that argument, which I think holds some weight, especially with his endeavors off the field, his podcast, wanting to get into the media, where better to do that than the place you played your entire career. So I think that is like looking long-term valuable to keep that goodwill with the city and with everyone. But I think he's ultimately built up enough of that goodwill over his career, though it hasn't been won with the championship. The counterweight to that force, in my opinion, is just age. It is father time. And Cam Heyward, despite being a first team All-Pro last year, despite being, in my opinion, the most important player on the roster last year and potentially the most important player on the roster this year, he's getting up there. Father time is breathing down his neck, and he knows it. This is his last chance to cash in. Now, it's potentially counterintuitive to forfeit game checks in an effort to get paid more. We saw that didn't work out well for Le'Veon Bell. It never really has in the NFL because, true free agency doesn't really exist in the NFL. Kevin Clark of ESPN has this theory that, which I tend to agree with in almost all cases, that no team has ever traded a player that they wanted to keep in the NFL because you have the franchise tag looming to be able to control these guys. And if you want to get something done, that's just so much leverage. Real free agency doesn't really exist in this sport, especially for the upper tier, upper echelon players. It's bad for the players. Ultimately, I do think it's kind of good for the league, that continuity. I'm typically always on the side of the players in these arguments. And if push came to shove and you made me say franchise tag or no franchise tag, I'd say get rid of it because it's unfair. It unfairly tamps down the market for these players and keeps them from getting fully guaranteed contracts and things that they are due, and the NFLPA, once it's back on 2 feet or on 2 feet at all, should continue to fight for. In Heyward's case, I feel a little bit differently about it. I think he could be willing to miss the games. I don't think it's in his best interest, because it's typically not in anyone's best interest to hold out like this, to miss game checks. Hassan Reddick did it last year, and now he signed another deal with the Buccaneers and lost a lot of money, and it just didn't work out. Le'Veon Bell, same thing. You don't have enough leverage in this league where careers are inherently short and prime years are inherently short. And Cam Heyward has been an exception to that role because he's played so well so deep into his career. And there are other defensive linemen doing the same. Calais Campbell comes to mind. But he has 2 years left on his deal that he just signed last year. And if he truly intended to, after an all-pro year, want to come back and renegotiate the thing, put that in writing. Like, these contracts have so many stipulations and so many bonuses, such complicated incentive structures. We learn about it every year, week 17 and 18, when this player needs so many catches to get $1 million, and this player needs a sack to get 500,000. These contracts are written with such complex incentive structures. If you truly believed you wanted to renegotiate this thing after being an all-pro, get that in writing. You or your agent or whoever, get that in writing. You made a mistake. A handshake deal is not, and the Steelers should do good by one of their legends, right? Cam Heyward is one of the all-time sack leaders in franchise history, the longest tenured player on the roster right now, the only player on the roster who's won a playoff game as a Pittsburgh Steeler. That stuff is really valuable. He's built up a ton of goodwill with the city, with the organization. And yes, it's fair to do right by him. But if you set a precedent as an organization that you sign a deal, have an all-pro year, and you just get to come back to the negotiation table, that's a dangerous precedent to set, even when it's Cam Heyward. Because Art Rooney and Omar Khan and Mike Tomlin can say, the next player that tries to do it can say, well, that was for Cam Heyward. But then that player is going to say, oh, I'm not viewed in the light of Cam Heyward. I just had an all-pro season, right? It's such a slippery slope to walk, and it's pro management. And I'm almost never pro management in these situations, but as the Steelers need to look at this, I don't think you can cave. I think you can sweeten the pot. There are bonuses in Heyward's contract next year that are non-guaranteed. Guarantee them, right? Sweeten the pot a little bit. You have some room. You can move up some of those bonuses into this year if you want to. I'm totally fine with restructuring. Restructuring is totally common thing to do. And then if Heyward has another great year, all right, you sign him to another big deal. But to tear this thing up and give him a new deal, a raise, whatever, it's a bad practice to set. And it was Heyward's mistake and his agent's mistake. Cam Heyward seems like a great guy. Like, I don't know him. I don't know how he operates in these negotiations. How could you? Or how could I? Reporters maybe. But when you think that a handshake deal and a giggle is enough to tear up a deal, it's just a mistake. You got to get this stuff in writing. And I don't think the Steelers should or will cave on it. I think there's potentially a willingness to sweeten the pot, like I said. But if Heyward's willing to miss games, I think you walk it right up to that line. I think you'd be willing to let this get a little bit messy, because ultimately I don't know that, yes, Father Time is working in Heyward's favor to push for this hold in and push for a new deal, because it could be his last chance and likely is his last chance to cash in big. But it's also working against him that he only has so many game checks left in his career. And to forfeit some of them, I I think he might be willing to do it, but I think he'll realize pretty quickly that it's a mistake. And once the season's going, the Steelers aren't going to renegotiate. They're not going to really break that rule. So ultimately, I think Cam Heyward's going to be a Steeler this season. He's going to play. Maybe not in week 1, but he's probably going to give in this. And I think the Steelers should hold the line pretty firm, even though Cam Heyward is a remarkably valuable player to this defense that the Steelers absolutely need for, if not 17, 14 games of the season to reach their ceiling, to compete for a playoff spot, to compete for the division, which I think is already out of reach with Baltimore and Cincinnati, and maybe not Cincinnati because that defense is so flawed. And now they're looking at trading Trey Hendrickson, which was just gross mismanagement to not do it earlier if you were going to be willing to do it ultimately. But I think an argument that will and is starting to emerge as well is that the Steelers maybe don't need to have Cam Heyward at the beginning of the season because Derek Harmon is going to be a star. That's my next reality check. Derek Harmon is going to be a star. Real or fake? That feels like the narrative coming out of preseason game number 2. I am not going to overreact to the preseason. I said to myself in the mirror 20 times this morning, I remember how reckless it got with Kenny Pickett heading into his second year after a great preseason. I just am not going to do it. But man, did Derek Harmon look awesome. He looked great. Not just the sack of Kyle Trask, where he uses just ridiculous power to bull rush the guard and run right into Trask, but to blow up run plays on the front side of run plays, like just redirecting the running back because nope, there's a guard right there. There was supposed to be a hole. There's 2 300+ pound men because Harmon just drove the guard back. Like that type of disruption where it's not going to show up as a TFL, but it completely destroyed the play. That's what Harmon was doing all night. And to his credit, Keanu Benton was doing it as well. And Benton could be in line for a breakout in year 3. Certainly the Steelers are hoping so. I'm hoping so. I really like Benton. I think he's miscast when he has to play nose. But I think you have a nose tackle on the field so sparingly in the modern NFL, it's not really that big of a deal. So Harmon and Benton are going to get their snaps at 3-tech at defensive end, and they're going to do some work with it. And let's look at the early part of the Steelers schedule because this is still through the lens of can the Steelers survive without Cam Heyward if he is truly willing to sit out some games. Week 1, the Jets. Week 2, the Seahawks. Week 3, the Patriots. Week 4, the Vikings. Week 5, bye. Week 6, the Browns. The Seahawks, Patriots, and Vikings all have major issues on their offensive line and specifically on the interior of their offensive line. The Seahawks have had issues on the interior of their offensive line for years. They drafted Gray Zabel in the first round last year to try to rectify that. And all reports are that Zabel is doing much better. And it's going to be this outside zone scheme, Clint Kubiak stuff in Seattle that's going to help alleviate some of those issues because it's just, if run well, it's a scheme that minimizes, it just takes some of the burden off the offensive line. But that's still a line that's a work in progress. That's not one of the better ones in the league. And with a quarterback now in Sam Darnold, who is really pressure sensitive, especially pressure up the middle. We saw that in his final 2 games with Minnesota when Detroit heated him up like crazy and blew out the Vikings in a game that was closer, but Darnold just couldn't capitalize on anything in week 18 last year for the Lions to win the 1 seed. And then in the playoffs when the Minnesota offensive line just got manhandled and Darnold looked like a disaster once again. And I think the Steelers can do that to the Seahawks. I think it would be a lot easier to do that with Cam Heyward, right? Like I think the Steelers could win that game without him. You'd rather have him. The Patriots tried to upgrade that line. Will Campbell with the 4th overall pick, he looks pretty good at left tackle. That's not on the interior, right? That's dealing with Alex Highsmith or TJ Watt if Watt flips around every once in a while. That's not dealing with Harmon and Benton and potentially Heyward. So I think those are teams, and the Vikings as well, that I already mentioned when they had Darnold. Now they have JJ McCarthy. Those are all teams where Benton and Harmon can do a good enough job on the interior that you feel good about that matchup in the trenches. But they're still all teams because the Steelers are not. The Steelers live in close games. This is just Mike Tomlin's ethos. This roster isn't good enough to blow teams out. When the margins are slim, Cam Heyward is the type of player that can swing games like that, especially because I just don't see a ton of depth. Even if Derek Harmon is a star, you still need Cam Heyward. You still need Y.A. Black to be good because Y.A. Black looks like he's emerging. He's been kind of a camp darling, and he's definitely going to make this roster. He's a shoo-in for sure after being a 6th-round pick out of Iowa this year. So even if those guys all hit, you still want Heyward. That's a situation in a position group where you need a lot of depth. You don't want to be running out Montrevious Adams. Obviously, he's not with the team anymore, but we saw how disastrous that can be for multiple seasons. You don't want to be relying on a high snap count from Isaiah Loudermilk. You just don't want to put your team in that situation. So Heyward is important regardless of Harmon's outcome. To Harmon specifically, he looked like he did in college. And that's what you're trying to gauge in the preseason, right? When they're moving up in competition, even if it's against backups, it's still a jump from college, right? Because these are all now pros. And they're the best of college, even the backups. So do they look like they did in college? Do they have the physical advantages that they had? Do they look quick enough, strong enough, fast enough, whatever, at the next level? This isn't just for Harmon on the defensive line. It's for any rookie in the preseason. You can gauge something, not everything. Yeah, Harmon looked like he did at Oregon. He was a force in the run game as a pass rusher. He was so disruptive and everything that made you fall in love with him throughout the draft process. I think it was on display in preseason game number 2. I think some of it, I think there were flashes of it in preseason game number 1. But it looked a lot better. And the Steelers, the results were there early on. The Bucs could not run the ball. Even with Bucky Irving, who in my opinion is one of the better running backs in the entire NFL, and pieces of their starting offensive line. Tristan Wirfs obviously was not out there and won't be for some of the beginning of the season with an injury, but Bucky Irving couldn't get anything with Benton and Harmon on the field. And that's really, really promising. I think it's more reality than not saying that Derek Harmon is going to be a star. That's not all just based on what I saw in the preseason. I already believed that coming into the year. I believed that coming into the draft. I was really high on Harmon, and I was just looking for confirmation, right? That's what you can do in preseason. You can look. I'm not going to change my opinion about a guy, but I can get some confirmation. And yeah, he looks great. So to me right now, that's trending in the right direction, trending in the direction of being reality, that Derek Harmon is just going to be a star on the defensive line for the Steelers. To the next one, we're going to finally flip around to the other side of the ball and Roman Wilson. Another highly drafted player, though not a first-round pick, a third-round pick 2 years ago in 2024. And another player who is going to be asked to fill a pretty significant role for the team this year. He missed all of last year with an injury. You know the story. Essentially redshirted, played 5 snaps. And for the second straight preseason game, the reports out of camp were not great. And I kind of corroborated those when I was there, that Roman Wilson didn't look particularly special in training camp. But he's a gamer. He was a gamer at Michigan. That's the reason that Jim Harbaugh fell in love with him. right? He's a savvy route runner. He's physical and tough for being an undersized guy. I think a lot of that stuff translates when you put the pads and the helmets on, and it's translating. 2 catches for 72 yards on Saturday night. Caught a post route bomb when he just ran past Jamel Dean, who is a legit NFL cornerback that starts. He was injured a lot last year for the Bucs and had a really bad year, but he's a starting cornerback in the NFL. And Wilson just blew right by him. Real vertical speed. And that's the question in my mind for Wilson. This is a player I was really high on coming out of the draft. And I was high on him because I know he can do the stuff from the slot. He's a quick separator against man coverage, runs pretty crisp routes, if not like the most perfect routes. He just knows how to kind of get leverage and win in man coverage. He's really savvy against zone. That's where I like him even better, especially out of the slot. He just knows where to sit down, find the green grass, and just be a friendly quarterback friendly target out there. All of that stuff I was super high on. I knew that would translate. So the question then for can he be a real wide receiver too? Because that's our next reality check. Can Roman Wilson be a wide receiver too? The question mark is, can he win on the outside and can he threaten a defense vertically? He ran well in the combine. He was a downfield threat at Michigan, but his size is a concern for that. And he's not like a true burner. If he can threaten vertically, like he did on Saturday night, then he's a wide receiver 2 in the NFL, in my opinion. So, checking boxes, right? Confirming something I already felt. I'm not going to change my opinion about the guy. My evaluation of him coming out of college was that he could do all of that stuff. And if he can win downfield, then he can be a guy. Maybe not. I don't see him ever being a wide receiver 1 or anything. Super high volume 2, but an inside outside slot guy who can win on the perimeter as well and be just a really reliable 2. I'm seeing that. Or maybe like a super +3. All right, I saw the vertical stretch. I saw the post route. He got wide open on a deep crosser off play action, which is kind of the design of the play more than it is anything that Wilson really did. But that's Arthur Smith's stuff. Like that's Arthur Smith's wheelhouse. Hard play action to a deep intermediate crosser. That is just everything for Arthur Smith. That's the reason Ryan Tannehill got a big contract in the NFL and revived his NFL career after being a backup in Tennessee. Like that is the stuff. And Wilson can do it really well. So I have been impressed with both of these games. The momentum really seems to be building. And I feel like I'm getting overly positive. Don't worry, that'll end. I feel like I'm getting overly positive about these guys, but I continue to like, we're talking about a bunch of young players. I continue to be a big fan of Omar Khan's draft classes. And it's difficult in the NFL to get out of the middle. Really, really difficult to get out of the middle. Go from the middle to the top. Usually you go from the middle to the bottom to the top. And that's an easier path because, you get the higher draft picks. You can trade away guys, get more draft capital. One of the ways, obviously, is quarterback play. That's not going to happen for the Steelers. If you're not going to do that, you have to hit on so many draft picks to move the needle. That's going to be the only way to do it, is to just nail all these draft picks. And it's been mixed results, especially in the late rounds. Guys like Mark Bruner or Carson Bruner, maybe not going to make the team. Corey Trice, maybe not going to make the team. There are some later round picks that have been misses, but the early round stuff I'm into from Omar Khan. And so that's where a lot of this positivity comes from. I liked the players to begin with, and I'm getting confirmation of that in the preseason. They look like they belong. Roman Wilson looks like he belongs on an NFL field. And that's so encouraging because from what we were hearing in training camp That was a question mark. And for what you see physically from him, just his size, that becomes a question mark. That's gonna creep into your head. But I'm encouraged by Roman Wilson. I'm encouraged by what I've seen from all three Omar Khan draft classes, except for one player that we're gonna talk about later. But yeah, and I think Wilson, the last thing on him, I think he can be valuable as a blocker as well. I saw it at Michigan. It's on the tape, even being that undersized guy. And that's super important in an Arthur Smith offense because you're trying to run so much of that outside zone stuff. That is a reason that Cooper Kupp became a superstar for Sean McVay and Robert Woods became a star for Sean McVay. They were both great blockers, so it kept them on the field enough to benefit from the design of the passing game and just being really good players, right? Because those are two really good players, or at least were. They're both still hanging on, but in 2017, 18, everything. So that brings us to another player on the offense, not the one I'm going to be more negative about. Another player that I just loved out of the draft. I really liked going into the process. He was my dream wide receiver, dream running back target for the Steelers coming into this last year's draft. Reality check. Caleb Johnson has a long way to go. Real or fake? Again, it's a little of both. If you make me pick, I'm going to say fake. I'm going to say he's ready to be an NFL contributor soon. Not right now, because I saw some stuff, and I'm sure everyone's seeing some stuff that they don't love from Caleb Johnson. But I still believe in the player. I still believe in the talent. He hasn't done anything to supplant Jaylen Warren as running back one, which I was really hoping he was going to do. I like Warren a lot. I also liked Warren a lot in juxtaposition with Najee Harris because I was just so out on Harris as a player. The volume plotting runner, 1,000-yard back thing doesn't do it for me, right? You're hunting explosives in the run game. That's almost everything the run game should be about, right? In the modern NFL, passing is so much more efficient than running the ball. That's changing with, I've talked about it. Defenses have gotten lighter. Offenses are reinvesting in multiple tight ends and additional offensive linemen and trying to run power stuff. That's changing. It still isn't, it still hasn't changed. It still hasn't flipped to being more efficient to run the ball than throw it. Throwing is still the most efficient way to move the ball down the field. And defenses are still going to be operating that way. So in the run game, you gotta hunt the big plays. You gotta hunt the explosiveness. It's super valuable to just, stay on schedule, but you need somebody who can hit home runs. Ideally, you have somebody who can keep you on schedule and hit home runs. Derrick Henry, Saquon Barkley, all these great backs. But if you make me choose between a Najee Harris, or this might be an unfair comparison, or a Devon Achane in Miami, Achane. I still don't know where we're at on that. I think it's Achane. In Miami, obviously you're going to pick Achane because he's just a better player. But in terms of the archetype of physical guy who's going to be, kind of a plotter, but he's going to get you first downs and can handle a huge workload, or little undersized guy, super speedster. You're not going to really want to run him between the tackles a ton, but he's going to hit some home runs in the run of the passing game. Give me the home run hitter. And again, that's not the best comparison, but even if you do like a Raheem Mostert a couple of years ago against Najee Harris, right? Where it's the speed guy who can actually break one. Maybe he's not as effective down to down. I don't know that the numbers necessarily bear that out with Mostert either, because I just don't think Najee Harris is a very good player, but still you get the point. I want the home run hitter. I don't know if Jaylen Warren really is that, but he's more of it than Najee Harris was. And Caleb Johnson, though he looks a lot like Najee Harris, he is kind of a similar build, a bigger guy, is not like that either. He can hit a home run. He's just gotta recognize, which all young running backs do, what can I get away with in the NFL? And I think he's still going through that process in the preseason, right? He had some long runs, especially just as these nice stretch zones go to the side. The cutback lane is right there, and he can accelerate so well. He sees it and he hits it. He accelerates really well out of that cut. That's why he's such a good fit for this offense and why Najee Harris wasn't. He didn't see it well, and he doesn't explode in and out of those cuts. But Caleb Johnson just does it so smooth. He can go against the grain. He can go with the grain. When he finds that hole, he's going to put his foot in the ground and hit it. And he's not going to lose any speed and any momentum doing it, right? He can just transition that and accelerate into it really, really well. He's such a good outside zone runner. And he did that a couple times. He also got to the second level a couple times and tried to bounce it outside. Tried to make an 8-yard gain, a 50-yard touchdown like you can in college. And like some players can in the NFL, but they don't do it necessarily that way. They don't do it by trying to bounce everything outside. You just take what's given to you. You got to make somebody miss. And then if it's there, hit it. And I felt like he was still trying to do a little too much. I think in preseason game number 1, he was definitely worse. I know he was worse. He was better in game 2, but he's still trying to do a little too much. But I don't think he has a long way to go. I think it's close. I think it's there, and I think it's close. I think Warren will hold him off. I think Kenneth Gainwell will have a role in this offense, certainly in the passing game. And just being a veteran running back that Mike Tomlin and Arthur Smith seem to really like. But to me, Caleb Johnson's ultimately going to end the season as the feature back. I just believe that. I believe in the talent. And I don't think it's a super long way to go to get there. I think there are problems in the run game that begin elsewhere. And that'll bring us to our final reality check of the show. And before we get to that, it's a little tease for you in the podcasting game. Before we get to that, if you're a fan of the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Still Curtain podcast, if you're a fan of my work or Tommy and Shane's work, or if you aren't a big fan of my work and you like them, whatever, like and subscribe to the show on YouTube, on Spotify, anywhere you get your podcasts. We really appreciate your support. And we're going to have more stuff coming throughout the season. We're figuring out the schedule completely, potentially 2 shows for me a week. We got to figure that out. But definitely a game day reaction show will be coming from me every Steelers game day, hopefully every Steelers game day, barring any unforeseen circumstances. Every Steelers game day, right after the show. You want to be subscribed to it so you know you're getting that live right after. You can hop right on, hang out with me, ask your questions in the chat, whatever. That's just going to be really fun. I'm super excited for the season. And, who wouldn't be? Even with the Steelers maybe not having Super Bowl expectations, football's almost here. You want to be with us through all of it. So make sure you're liked and subscribed. All right. I saw a thing in the chat. He might be a bust. I believe this is talking about Caleb Johnson because it was just a few minutes ago. I just disagree. I think the talent's there. I think the speed is there. I think he builds speed really well, which works for the outside zone game. So I think there's a home run hitter in there, but not the way he's been trying to do it. I think he's going to learn that pretty quickly. But a player who might be a bust, and in my opinion is a bust, is a former first-round pick of Omar Khan's. You might know who I'm talking about. Reality check. The Steelers' young offensive tackles are ready. This is something I started to – I promise you I'm not doing a straw man. I really started to see some momentum pushing the direction of, like, these guys are ready to go. Troy Fautanu and Broderick Jones, The move for Broderick Jones is a step in the right direction. They looked good on Saturday night, and they're going to be ready for the season. I disagree on one count. I think Fautanu is a stud. I think he looked really good. He looked really comfortable. He's athletic. He mirrors well. He can bulldoze in the run game. He can anchor as a pass blocker. I think it's all there for him. I think he's a future star at right tackle, or at least like well above replacement level tackle in the NFL, a guy you're going to get a second contract. Broderick Jones is still a complete mess. A complete mess. For, the PFF people out there, for what that's worth, I put value in it, especially for the offensive line stuff, because I mean, ultimately, I know they're doing this at a higher level than probably I am. He graded out as a 45.4, a 48 run block grade, a 42 pass block grade. In my opinion, watching all the snaps, which I did, obviously on Saturday and then again this morning, I thought he was actually better as a pass blocker than he was as a run blocker. I thought the run blocking stuff was really a mess. And there's a hope that once you get Isaac Seumalo next to him, things improve a little bit. But right now, from what I saw with the first team offensive line, 4 of the 5 first teamers out there, the Steelers can't confidently run the ball to the left side. You're just going to have a really tough time doing it, because Broderick Jones he's sloppy and slow and loses leverage so quickly that he's a lot of times just at the mercy of the defensive end. And they just stack and shed and make the play in the run game and blow things up. And it's just not coming together. There's a physical ability there, but it's still so loose. He just doesn't look refined. He doesn't look like a third-year pro. He still looks like a rookie. He still looks like a baby deer walking on ice. It's not there. And I don't think it's going to be there. I think he's going to be a flat bust. And the Steelers, we're holding out hope as Steelers fans that, and I'm sure the Steelers are too, that the move from right tackle really screwed him up. Move from left to right tackle really screwed him up. And now he's back at left tackle where he belongs. And he's going to take a step in the right direction. And I am just not seeing it. I'm not seeing. And again, it goes to the confirmation thing. I'm not going to change my opinion about somebody in the preseason, but if I'm confirming what I already believe, okay, I'll lend some credence to that, to those performances. I already believed that Broderick Jones just wasn't going to be that dude, and I'm not seeing anything to change my mind. It's confirmation all over the place. And again, maybe that'll change a little bit. I think the run game will be better this year. And I think Seumalo getting out there will be really helpful for Broderick Jones, because of course it is, to have a better player next to you. But I don't think it's the type of thing where the Steelers are going to feel confident in that position going into next season. I think they're definitely going to have to draft an offensive tackle early. Good thing they have a lot of early picks. The first one's probably going to have to be spent on a quarterback. But for this season, it's not just the run game that it's going to have a big impact on. And this is my big concern about it. And I don't know that it crystallized in my head really until Friday night when I went on 93.7 The Fan with my friend Austin Bechtold. He had me on and talked a little Steelers, a little college football. And he asked about Broderick, what I saw at training camp, what I've seen through the preseason, what I think about him. And he asked it in relation to Aaron Rodgers. And that kind of made it click for me in a way maybe it hasn't throughout the preseason and offseason and everything. This will be particularly, and maybe this isn't rocket science, if he struggles, especially as a pass protector, it'll be particularly impactful for a player like Rodgers. That would not be the case 5 years ago with Aaron Rodgers. 5 years ago, Aaron Rodgers, is there anything that's going to be such a detriment to that player as the MVP of the league? He's a 4-time MVP of the league now, but he's 41, 2 years removed from an Achilles injury. I think he'll be better, more mobile this year than he was last. But his superpower throughout his entire career has been his ability to create off schedule. I've said it all offseason, right? Get out of the pocket. He's athletic enough to get out of the pocket, keep plays alive. And then he has the arm to access parts of the field when he's throwing off platform that other quarterbacks just do not have. He can generate so much torque without having his feet planted. And it's just what has made him special for years and years and years. And that arm is still there. I don't think the special ability to create that type of horsepower without a perfect platform is necessarily there at the same level anymore from what I saw for him playing for the Jets last year, But the arm's still there in the pocket. So he has to make this transition that we saw from Ben, and we saw it not go so well at the end of Ben's career here, that he isn't Peyton Manning. He isn't Tom Brady. He isn't one of these guys who has you beat in the chess game before the ball's even snapped. I think Rodgers is good at that stuff. And he has the hard count that gives away a lot of stuff and, gets him some first downs. And like, that's something he's special with before the snap. But I don't think his pre-snap chess game recognition is at the level of like those greats who were able to do it at a pretty high level. And Peyton Manning won a Super Bowl without an arm, essentially. Like, he couldn't throw. And he was bad that year, but he still won a Super Bowl because he was so advanced in those parts of the game. Like, just so expert level. Rodgers is just a tick below that, and he has to try to become that player where he's getting the ball out really quickly. Last year was his lowest average depth of target and quickest time to throw of his career. That trend is going to continue. He's going to have to be that type of quarterback that gets it out really quickly. And yes, that low release time and everything, low ADOT, will mitigate any of the impacts of a struggling offensive tackle in some ways. But when Broderick Jones loses over there and Rodgers feels that pressure, those instincts are gonna kick in, right? They're just have to. Those instincts are gonna kick in, spin out, step up, create, get out of the pocket, create. That's the stuff he's always been so special with. And I just don't know how mobile he's going to be anymore for that to be like, I think he needs and obviously this is true because he's older, but he needs a high level offensive line now more than ever in his career. And if Broderick Jones is a disaster again, and Jones has proven throughout the past 2 years that he kind of gets better throughout the season and becomes less of a problem, but we also stop worrying about it because we know there's no other option. I think that happens as well. But throughout the season, I think that'll be a huge issue for Rodgers because it's going to speed up that process even more. So we're getting less of if he still has the arm from the pocket to access those throws that maybe a lot of other guys in the NFL don't, you need time now to get to them. Before he didn't because he could buy his own time. Now he needs the offensive line to hold up for 3.5 seconds every once in a while to let that arm be special. And if Jones isn't good enough to let him do that, then it really turns him into just that kind of point guard, right? That Ben became late when it was just kind of sad and he's just getting it out really quick. And all the defenses realize we're just putting everybody at the line of scrimmage and they're not going to, maybe they throw it 3 yards twice, but then they're 3rd and 4 and they don't have an answer. And if the run game isn't elite, which I don't think it can be elite with such a weak link at left tackle, you can feel great about everybody else on the offensive line. And great is strong, but I feel really good. I feel really great about Zach Frazier. I feel really good about Troy Falatanu. I feel good about Mason McCormick, and I know what I'm getting in Isaac Seumalo, and he's not going to be a weak link on really any line. But the offensive line is such a weak link unit that everybody else can block it well. And if it's a disaster over on the left side or anywhere, it just all falls apart. It all crumbles. And then you have to shift so much help over to that side, right? Like I've talked a lot of this offseason about how Darnell Washington can be a such a weapon for this team because he can help as an additional offensive lineman. He can block in the passing game. And I think that's where he's going to be super useful. And in the run game as well. But if you always have to put him on the left side, and it just starts to become predictable. Teams know how to attack you. They know where your weak point is. And that's why the offensive line is such a weak link unit. And the Steelers have a weak link. And it's going to force Aaron Rodgers to play a style of football that age is forcing him to play as well, but it's going to ramp that up even more and speed him up even more. And Rodgers is great when he's just, flinging it on quick slants, and like he can really get it out quick. And even when he acquiesces to some of the RPO stuff, like he's good at it. But he's not as special of a player if that's what he's limited to. And then it's okay, we're in the same situation we were in with Russell Wilson, where it's deep ball variance, right? You're hitting some or you aren't. If you're hitting them, you're going to be a good offense. You're going to look like a good offense. If you're not hitting those deep balls, you just don't have enough answers elsewhere in the passing game. So I'm very concerned about Broderick Jones. I'm, again, glad that the Steelers brought in Andrus Peat as another body on that left side, specifically on the left side, where Pete can potentially be a relief option at left tackle. But like, if you're talking about we're pulling the ripcord on Broderick Jones in year 3 and maybe going to Andrus Peat, that's a bad situation to be in, especially on a roster that is ostensibly trying to win now. The win now narrative has kind of gotten away from itself a little bit because the Steelers have still, they're not all their chips are in, not even close. They have so many draft picks next year. They did such a good job in free agency of making sure they picked up a lot of comp picks, the George Pickens trade, everything. So it's not like this is an all-in year, but they're trying to win right now. And you have a really small window left, if there is even a window at all, of Aaron Rodgers playing winning football. And it could all come crashing down, and that window could slam shut if Broderick Jones doesn't look significantly better than he did in preseason game number 2, against some starters, but also against some backups for Tampa Bay, a defense that needs help on the defensive line and needs additional pass rushers. Like, that is not a huge strength for that team. And he looked rough. So I feel good about the other side of the line. This reality check, the answer is this is fake because Broderick Jones isn't there, and I don't think he's ever going to get there. Right? We talked about Caleb Johnson maybe has a long way to go. I don't think it's that long. Broderick Jones is a really long way to go, and I don't think he's ever going to get there. So that's my biggest concern about this team, about this roster heading into the season and coming out of preseason week number 2. We still have another preseason game to go. The Steelers will play the Panthers in preseason week number 3. Maybe we'll see some Aaron Rodgers. We aren't sure yet what we're going to get out of that. But the preseason has changed quite a bit from when it was 4 games. Now it's 3 teams. Some teams use week 2 as the dress rehearsal, if you will. Others use week 3. I would like to see Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf and those guys suit up a little bit, especially because you need to get off to a hot start, in my opinion, considering how the schedule looks. So hopefully we get to see them out there. Maybe we'll have a little bit more to talk about once we do, but still, we're not drawing big conclusions from the preseason. But if we see something that we already believed and it's being reinforced, that can be somewhat meaningful. Still take it with a grain of salt, but I think that can be meaningful. Let's not overreact like crazy because real football is around the corner and we can overreact like hell to that. Can't wait for it. It's coming up. And make sure you're subscribed to the Still Curtain podcast for when it gets here. A big thank you to everyone at FanSided and everyone with Still Curtain for helping me out with everything with this episode and this show. The season's almost here. Can't wait for it. I'll talk to you next Monday. And until then, have a good one. And as always, go Steelers.